So I want you to imagine pulling up to an electric vehicle charging station in the dead of winter.
Oh, the absolute worst case scenario right there.
Right. It is bitterly cold outside, like minus 20 degrees Celsius. The
Yeah.
wind is howling.
Yeah, nobody wants to be out in that.
Exactly. So you plug your car in, and instead of waiting around for, I don't know, an hour while your frozen battery just sluggishly accepts this tiny trickle of power, you get a full charge in just a few minutes.
Which is wild to even think about.
It is. And the best part? You haven't lost a single ounce of battery performance despite the sub-zero temperatures. So, no range anxiety, no hours-long waits with the heater blasting just to keep warm. You just plug in, charge up, and get right back on the road.
I mean, it sounds like pure science fiction right now, especially considering how notoriously how much current lithium-ion batteries struggle when the temperature drops.
Oh, totally. They hate the cold.
They really do. But based on the manufacturing pipelines we are looking at today, that scenario is actually the very near future.
And that is exactly the future we are mapping out today on this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because we've got a massive stack of sources to get through.
We really do, yeah. It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. We are pulling from some recent international reporting, including some really detailed insights from China Daily, looking at this intense global race for solid-state batteries and autonomous driving networks. We've also got this highly practical 2024 academic business case analysis. This is from the KTH Royal Institute of Technology by Pedro Montoya, and it examines the actual mechanics of mobile battery charging.
Which is fascinating, by the way.
Oh, it really is. And finally, we are anchoring this whole discussion with this incredibly dense, just comprehensive 2024 report to Congress from the U.S. Department of Energy.
The DOE report.
Yeah, the DOE report. And that one details the monumental impact electric vehicles can have on our power grid.
You know, it's the right combination of sources, I think, because it really forces us out of the usual silos.
What do you mean by that?
Well, usually people just focus on the shiny new cars, right? Or they only focus on the boring utility infrastructure. But you really can't understand this transition unless you view it holistically. The vehicle and the grid, they're basically becoming a single organism.
A single organism. I like that. And that is the core mission for this deep dive. We are going to look at the electrified future from two entirely different angles.
Yeah.
First, the breakthrough chemistry happening inside the cars themselves.
Right.
And second, this massive, largely invisible puzzle of how our power grid is actually going to survive and hopefully thrive when millions of these rolling batteries suddenly just, plug into the wall.
Because it's a huge shock to the system.
It's massive. And listen, whether you are an EV skeptic or an early adopter or honestly just someone who relies on flipping a switch and having the lights turn on, this transition is coming for your community. It's coming for your wallet. And it's going to change how your everyday world operates.
Yeah, absolutely. And the catalyst for everything we're going to discuss today is really this technological leap happening inside the vehicle chassis itself.
Solid-state batteries.
Exactly. Based on the industry consensus across all these reports, we are expecting limited commercial application of solid-state batteries by 2027.
Wow, that's soon?
It is. And then mass production is expected to seriously scale up by 2030.
Okay, let's unpack this solid-state shift for a second.
Yeah.
Because the physical mechanism here is what makes the magic happen. So with our current lithium-ion batteries, you have a liquid electrolyte. Right.
Correct. A liquid solution.
Right. So think of the ions inside the battery like people trying to move through a crowded swimming pool.
Okay, I like this.
Yeah, so when it's warm out, they can swim fine. But when the temperature drops to, like, minus 20, that water basically turns to thick molasses, and the ions get incredibly sluggish.
And that's exactly why your range drops so drastically in the winter. And beyond the temperature sensitivity, that liquid is volatile. I mean, if the battery gets punctured in an accident, that liquid can leak, it can react, and potentially ignite.
Which is obviously a huge safety concern.
Exactly. So solid-state technology strips that liquid electrolyte out entirely. It replaces it with a solid, highly conductive material. Often it's a ceramic or glass or some kind of solid polymer.
Okay, so sticking with the analogy here, instead of forcing those ions to swim through a pool of liquid, the solid-state structure creates this perfectly aligned, microscopic crystal highway.
That's a great way to picture it, yeah.
So the ions just zip right through the structure seamlessly. They don't care if it's freezing outside because a solid crystal lattice It doesn't turn to molasses in the cold.
Nope, it stays completely stable.
Plus, there's no volatile liquid to catch fire.
Right. And the structural efficiency of that crystal highway also means you can pack significantly more energy into the exact same physical footprint.
So the batteries don't have to be massive.
Exactly. We're looking at performance specs that push vehicle ranges well over 1,000 kilometers on a single charge.
That's insane.
It is. And crucially, the manufacturing projections show costs eventually dropping to around $138 per kilowatt hour.
Wait, I need to jump in on that number, because isn't the magic threshold for price parity with internal combustion engines, isn't that usually cited as $100 per kilowatt hour?
Yes, that's the number everyone throws around.
Right, so is $138 really going to move the needle enough for mass market adoption? It seems high.
Well, the $100 mark has been the industry benchmark for years, sure, but it assumes a one-to-one comparison with current battery degradation rates.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, when you introduce solid state, the lifespan of the battery increases dramatically. So the total cost of ownership over a decade makes that $138 highly competitive.
Because you aren't replacing it as soon.
Exactly. And when you combine the extended lifespan, the safety profile, and 1,000-kilometer range, the psychological barrier of range anxiety essentially just evaporates.
But see, range anxiety isn't solely about how much juice your battery holds.
Yeah, right.
It's heavily tied to the availability of a physical plug.
Oh, absolutely. The infrastructure side.
Right. And we saw a massive real-world stress test of this recently. The sources point out that during China's Spring Festival, the sheer volume of EVs hitting the highway spiked by 20% compared to normal peak travel volumes.
Which is a huge surge.
It's massive. People were traveling long distances all simultaneously, and the fixed charging stations were just getting completely overwhelmed.
Well, yeah, because building fixed infrastructure for a peak surge that only happens a few days a year, it's incredibly capital inefficient.
Right.
I mean, you don't build a 50-stall charging plaza if 45 of those stalls are just going to sit empty for 360 days out of the year. It just doesn't make financial sense.
Which perfectly brings us to Pedro Montoya's 2024 thesis from KTH.
Yes, this is such a smart solution.
It really is. He breaks down the business case for mobile and modular charging services. Because instead of pouring concrete and laying copper for an artificial peak, they actually deployed mobile charging units.
Just driving the chargers right to the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Basically, these are massive battery packs on wheels that can be dispatched to highway rest stops specifically to absorb that holiday rush.
Yeah, and Montoya's analysis really nails the mechanics of what economists call stochastic demand.
The stochastic demand. Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. So fixed infrastructure works great for deterministic demand. That's when you know exactly how many people commute to an office park every Tuesday at 9 a.m., right?
Very predictable.
Very predictable. But holiday travel is stochastic. It surges unpredictably in specific locations based on a million different variables. So mobile charging units act as a flexible pressure release valve.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah, they completely decouple the charging service from the physical constraints of the local electrical grid at that specific highway exit.
Okay, so if Montoya's mobile chargers are out there solving the highway bottlenecks during a massive holiday rush, that really just shifts the problem down the line, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, we might have solved the physics inside the car with solid state, and we might have solved the availability of the plug on the highway. But what happens when millions of these ultra-dense, energy-hungry batteries all roll back into their neighborhoods at the end of the day and connect to the wall?
Ah, yeah, the home charging surge.
Right. Are our local grids actually prepared for that kind of localized energy dump?
And that brings us to the megawatt shockwave the Department of Energy is sounding the alarm on.
The DOE report.
Exactly. The sheer scale of anticipated adoption over the next few years, it is genuinely difficult to wrap your head around. The DOE's 2024 report to Congress projects that by 2030, we are going to see between 30 million and 42 million light-duty EVs on the road.
And it isn't just passenger sedans either. I mean, the report highlights that medium and heavy-duty vehicles, so we're talking transit buses, delivery fleets, 18-wheelers, they could make up 32% of sales in that sector by 2030 under their rapid adoption scenarios.
And the inclusion of heavy-duty transit, that is what fundamentally breaks the traditional math for the power grid.
Why is that?
Well, think about it. A level 1 or level 2 charger at your home is a relatively minor draw. It's somewhere between 1.4 and 10 kilowatts.
Which is like what, running a heavy-duty electric clothes dryer?
Basically, yeah. It's manageable. But commercial transit operates in an entirely different universe. The DOE models show that a highway truck stop equipped with multiple fast chargers for a fleet of heavy-duty vehicles, it will require an instantaneous draw of 19 to 20 megawatts of power.
Wait, hold on. A 20 megawatt draw for a single truck stop.
Yeah, 20 megawatts.
I mean, that is the equivalent power requirement of an entire small town. How does a literal gas station equivalent physically draw the same power as a town without, like, melting the wires?
Right, and to understand why that is such a massive threat, you really have to look at the history of how power is routed.
Okay.
For over a century, the grid was built to be deterministic, just like we talked about earlier. Utilities generated a predictable amount of power, and they sent it to immobile objects.
Right, houses don't move.
Exactly. They knew exactly where a factory was, and they knew that factory would use a specific amount of power at exactly 2 p.m., but now, imagine a 20-megawatt load that is completely mobile.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a truck stop might draw zero power at 10 a.m., and then suddenly a logistics fleet pulls in at 3 p.m., and the local grid has to instantly manifest the power of a small town. And remember, grids don't have inherent storage. Generation has to perfectly match load second by second.
And our physical infrastructure simply was not laid out to accommodate massive sudden heat loads on the lines like that.
Not at all. And the DOE data is very specific about where the failure points are. You know, when people think of the power grid, they usually picture those giant 230 kilovolt transmission lines.
The big metal towers.
Right, the huge ones. Those massive bulk lines can largely handle the overall generation capacity. The true vulnerability actually lies in the lower voltage distribution network.
The local stuff.
Exactly. The 4.16 kilovolt lines running down your street and into local commercial zones. When a sudden 20 megawatt draw hits those local distribution lines, they hit their thermal limits almost immediately. The physical wires literally get too hot, they sag, and transformers just blow.
Which creates this terrifying timeline bottleneck. Because the sources point out that upgrading neighborhood distribution lines, getting the permits, digging up the streets, laying heavier copper that takes anywhere from 2 to 7 years.
That's a very slow process.
But a commercial developer can pour concrete and install a fast charger bank in a matter of months.
Yep.
So aren't we racing toward a wall here? Like, are we seriously looking at a scenario where utilities have to spend trillions of dollars ripping up every street in the country to install thicker wires before these cars hit the road?
Well, if we rely solely on the traditional rip and replace method of upgrading infrastructure, the costs will be astronomical. I mean, the report cites a localized study from California demonstrating this exact point.
What did they find?
They found that if EV charging remains unmanaged, meaning people just plug in whenever they want, meeting the distribution grid needs by 2035, would require $50 billion in physical upgrades in that state alone.
$50 billion.
Where?
Just for California.
Just California. However, if that charging is actively managed, the capital requirement drops to just $15 million.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the solution to not bankrupting our utilities and breaking the grid isn't just thicker wires.
Nope.
The solution is the cars themselves. We are so conditioned to think of EVs as these like parasitic loads, right? Just hungry mouths pulling from the grid.
Right, just taking energy.
Exactly. But they are actually massive, heavily insulated batteries on wheels. Through managed charging, which the industry calls V1G, and bidirectional charging, known as V2X or vehicle to everything, we flip the entire dynamic.
Completely flip it.
Millions of parked EVs suddenly become this distributed, decentralized battery for the entire country.
And the physics of bidirectional charging are just brilliant. Think about it, when your car is parked during the day, it can soak up excess, incredibly cheap solar power.
When the sun is shining and energy is abundant.
Exactly. Then, during the evening peak, when everyone gets home, turns on the air conditioning, and solar generation basically drops to zero, your car can discharge that stored power back into your home, or even back to the grid to support your neighbors.
Okay, mechanically though, how does V2X actually work? Because an EV battery holds direct current, right? DC power.
Yeah.
But our homes and the broader grid run on alternating current, or AC.
Right, they don't match.
You can't just dump DC power backward into a house without completely frying the electrical panel.
No, you definitely can't. And that is where the bidirectional inverter comes in. It sits either in the car or in the wall charger itself, and it acts as this highly sophisticated translator.
A translator?
Yeah, it takes the direct current from the car battery and meticulously converts it into an alternating current that perfectly matches the 60 hertz sine wave of the power grid. So it isn't just dumping power blindly, you know. It is surgically injecting precise voltages that are perfectly synchronized with the grid's frequency.
So the hardware and the physics are effectively solved. The cars can power the grid.
The engineering is solved, yes. But grid management is no longer just a physics problem. It is rapidly becoming a behavioral science problem.
How so?
Because this represents a monumental shift for utility companies. They aren't just managing electrons and copper wires anymore. They have to manage human choices.
Oh, right. Because think about your own driveway. If the utility company offers you a $150 rebate at the end of the year to let them actively manage your car's charging schedule, do you take it?
Right, is $150 enough?
Exactly. What if you agree to let them use your car as a battery, but then you have a medical emergency at 2 a.m. and you walk out to the garage, only to find the utility has completely drained your car to keep the neighborhood's grid stable?
And that is exactly the friction point. The social science of trust, value perception, and consumer control is now just as critical to the survival of the power grid as electrical engineering is. Utilities have to design incentive structures that are financially compelling, but they also have to guarantee absolute baseline reserves for the consumer so they never ever feel stranded.
Because turning millions of individually owned cars into a perfectly synchronized virtual power plant that requires intense coordination.
Massive coordination.
You have the vehicle's internal software, the charger on the wall, the app on your phone, and the utility company's master dispatch center. If those systems aren't talking to each other flawlessly, in real time, the entire symbiotic vision just collapses.
It does, and interoperability is really the invisible glue holding all this together. The DOE report hammers this point home over and over. The modern grid runs on data just as much as it runs on electrons. Without standardized open communication protocols, you simply cannot execute managed charging at scale. I mean, if the vehicle firmware uses some proprietary language that the local utility's dispatch software can't read, the car is isolated. It just becomes a dumb load on the grid again.
And building that level of interoperability requires a completely different kind of workforce. The DOE report noted that the energy sector added nearly 300,000 jobs in just 1 year, between 2021 and 2022 alone.
It's a huge influx.
Yeah. We're no longer just hiring traditional linesmen to string wire up poles. We need an army of software developers, data analysts, and network architects.
It is a complete transformation of what it means to work in the energy sector. And honestly, those software developers are arguably the most critical component right now because of the underlying risk of all this connectivity.
Right. Because what does this all mean when we link an app on your phone, a public fast charger, and the national power grid together in this continuous two-way dialogue? Doesn't that level of data integration create a massive, highly vulnerable attack vector for hackers?
It absolutely does. And the Department of Energy strategy emphasizes that you cannot retrofit cybersecurity onto a system this complex.
You can't just slap a patch on it later.
Exactly. It has to be built into the communication protocols from day one. In the security and infrastructure world, this vulnerability is tied to a concept called sector coupling.
Sector coupling. Right, because historically, the transportation sector and the electricity sector operated in almost total isolation from one another.
Completely separate.
Like if a localized grid went down, gas stations with backup generators could still pump fuel and you could still drive your car. Or if there was an oil embargo or a pipeline hack, your house still had electricity.
Exactly. But with the mass adoption of EVs, those two fundamental pillars of the modern economy are now permanently married.
Wow.
That is sector coupling. If one fails, the other fails. A sophisticated cyber attack on a major charging network's API could theoretically send malicious feedback loops that cripple transportation logistics nationwide.
That's terrifying.
And conversely, a coordinated hack that commands millions of car batteries to simultaneously draw massive power that could easily destabilize the grid.
It is a really high-stakes marriage. The vulnerability is very real, but at the same time, the potential upside of that marriage is incredible.
It is. Because when transportation and electricity are securely coupled, and they're speaking the same language, they make each other infinitely more efficient and resilient than they ever were apart. The car essentially becomes the shock absorber for the grid's volatility.
Well, to recap the terrain we've covered today, because it's been a lot.
It really has.
We started by looking inside the vehicle, right? At the promise of solid-state batteries generating these microscopic crystal highways that basically laugh at freezing temperatures and permanently kill range anxiety.
Right.
We then zoomed out to the megawatt shockwave, the terrifying reality of a single highway truck stop demanding the power of a small town,
Yeah.
and the realization that our local neighborhood distribution wires are the true bottleneck.
The real weak point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, we explored the invisible glue of interoperability in behavioral science, revealing a vision of a hyper-connected grid where the cars themselves save the physical infrastructure from total collapse.
It really is a profound transition. I mean, we're moving from a century-old system of passive consumption to one of active, dynamic participation. The vehicle is no longer just a depreciating asset sitting in a parking lot. It is an active, vital node in a national energy network.
And that leaves us with one final provocative thought to mull over. We've talked a lot today about how managed charging saves the utility companies billions of dollars in infrastructure upgrades.
Yep.
But follow that logic for a second. If your vehicle becomes an indispensable piece of your community's energy storage, providing a service the utility literally cannot function without job, could your car's battery eventually become an income stream for you?
Oh, that's a fascinating angle.
Right. Could your vehicle actually pay for itself over time just by sitting parked in your driveway, automatically trading electrons while you sleep?
The traditional economics of vehicle ownership are about to be completely rewritten.
It's a fascinating future to prepare for. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you. Keep looking for those connections. And then next time you pull up to a charging station on a freezing winter night, just remember the invisible network behind that plug is undergoing the greatest transformation in a century.